In a world where everyone knows everything. Yeah, right. One dad stands below everyone and yells, "I know nothing."
Please welcome.
This is the Dad Who Knows Nothing podcast.
All right, so welcome everybody. This is the Dad Who Knows Nothing podcast. Very excited to have Dai Manuel with us today. He's a super dad. He's dating his wife and a lead by example way of living. Now, some of his background is he's an award-winning digital thought leader and author, distinguished Toastmaster and keynote speaker. And he was also in his prior life a former partner and chief operating officer at a multi-million-dollar retail company. So he's got a lot of experience, and his background really resonated with me, and I think it'll resonate with all of you because he made a conscious decision to take control of his life and live the best life he could. And so, Dai, I'm so happy to have you with us. I think this is going to be a great conversation. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. I love the title. Okay, let's just call it out, right? Like, as dads, I think one of the most humbling things of becoming a parent is you realize that is a truth that we can never escape. We don't know anything.
Right.
It's the one thing I've just come to grips with is like, as much as I think I know what's best, often it's my kids that actually educate me on what's best.
Yeah. And the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. So that's absolutely true. So
Great title. Anyway,
thank you. I appreciate that. So
also being a father of two daughters like you with three, it's just like instant, man. I get it. So,
that's why this is going to be a good conversation. So Dai, talk to me about where you are today and how you got here with what your current passion is and how you're helping people that come to you and looking for help, looking to try to live their best life.
Thanks. Okay. Well, we'll start with the easy question. Okay. So, where do I start? Like most of us, and I mean, we were talking about this before we actually started recording too, is that these life paths that we find ourselves on are very rarely are they ever a straight line. I know if I look back on my life, there's no A to B to C. It's been like A to Z to K to number 1, 2, 3. It's just all of the map, quite literally. And there was a period in my life where I didn't like that. I didn't like that inconsistency. It made me feel a lot of fear, to be quite honest, because with those inconsistency, usually also signals a lot of change. A lot of us, we might say we want change or we need change. But needing and wanting are two different things. And so for myself, as much as I've been averse to change, I've realized it's just part of life. And that I can, attack it, kicking and screaming, or I can try to just go, as the cliche says, go with the flow. But I've realized even when you're in flow, you can also influence direction. And, I've been someone that's been in the health and wellness space now for I was talking about this with my wife the other day. It's coming up on almost 3 decades. I'm staring down the barrel of 46 years old. That's this fall. I'm like 4 months out, and as I'm looking down the gun at 46, I'm actually filled with optimism. Only because I know what I've experienced over, especially the last 26 years, has prepared me for whatever the next 50 is going to bring. And here's the thing. I came to health and fitness, but I didn't come to it naturally. A lot of people don't know this about me, but more and more are aware of it now if they know my story. But I was morbidly obese as a teenager. Some of those most influential. Can you remember what it was like being a teen? Do you remember what those days were like? I mean, it's hard being a teen already, but then you throw on top of that maybe some health complications and the other insecurities that come with that. It makes it really challenging, And I was from age 9 to 14. I was in that mode of unhealth, if you will. And I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me or anything along those lines. That's not why I'm sharing it, but I'm sharing it because that was just my reality. But I got there on my own. And it was largely due to trauma that I had experienced with my parents separating and ultimately divorcing. And all of a sudden, this household or this idea of what I believed a family was broken. And I didn't know how to deal with that at age 9. My parents, they were dealing with their own stuff, and I commend them for at least doing it as well as they could, but there were still some hard points there. And I learned very early on I can manipulate my emotional state by what I put in my body. And when you learn that, it's hard to unlearn it because we get that instant gratification, right? It's like, we know this. It's also why I turned into a drinker eventually too, was that same instant benefit I would get from doing that. Because whatever problem I had, at least it wasn't that big of a problem in those moments when I was either eating certain types of foods, playing video games, watching movies. That was my lifestyle as a teen. Of course I could put weight on, and it was really hard. But what was harder was coming to grips that I was actually more afraid of not changing than the idea of changing.
Hmm.
And I'm just going to say that again, because I think when people really think about every significant change that they've experienced or navigated, whether positively or negatively in your life, there probably was some semblance of that idea or awareness that if I don't make a change now, it's probably not going to get better. In fact, it most likely will get worse. That is what motivated me to make my change. And so I let people know, it's not like, I made a lot of my changes in my life based on fear. I don't know. Some people, I always wonder, should I share that? Because it doesn't sound very motivating. It's like I'm running away from something, not running towards something. And what I realized, it was just me coming to grips with, I don't want to be the way I am anymore. I do want to change. There's certain things that I aspire for. And I know the path that I'm on is not going to get me there. And that's where things got started, And I can dive into that and we can chat more about it. But I'm just curious because you went through a big change recently too, right?
Yeah, very similar. I was just ticking over the age of 40 and in the middle of the pandemic. And so many people probably felt this way, but I felt like I was on the downward trajectory from a health standpoint, from a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint. And I sat there and it kind of was fear, right? Because you sit there and you say, man, what's that going to look 5-10 years from now if I continue going down that path? And I'm sure that was similar for you. Mm-hmm. And, what I think the most effective change, fear can start it, but then I think the most effective change is when you're able to kind of turn that and see the benefits. Mm-hmm. And now that becomes the reason for the change, right? So yes, is that the best way to manage change?
Well, here's the funny thing about change, right? I think we all have different ideas on how to manage it, but when you're actually in the thick of change, like really, very traumatic change at times, you can't see 12 inches in front of your face,
right?
At least that's what I experienced. When you're in it, you're in it. And all you're thinking about is like, gosh, where am I going? What's my next step? And why the heck am I even doing this? Because a lot of the doubt and the self-judgment comes into play. And also we have to go off of whatever we've experienced up to that point in our life, because that's really what's truly true to us. Mm-hmm. Is past experiences and what we've navigated. And so if our past experiences are rather negative when it comes to change, of course, our perspective on change is probably not very positive. And for me, that's definitely where it started. I was change averse. I was like, no, I don't want to change. And the funny thing is I've seen this repeat itself a few times in my life now, because as they say, history has a habit of repeating itself. Well, it's so true when you look at the personal life that we all live. It often we see patterns repeating. And I didn't become aware of that until I was in my 30s, but I'm a slow learner. It's all good. As a teen, I realized that I looked at change as being something that was being forced upon me and not something that I wanted initially. And what I mean by this is for anyone that's watching or listening to this, the people that care about you most in your life, that our immediate family, our parents, our grandparents, our best friends, they obviously want the best for us. They want us to be happy, and to see us not in a good place often makes them want to help. But here's the thing. If you're not wanting to be helped, any act of trying to help somebody, especially when they don't want to be helped, can be seen as an attack, can be seen as somebody trying to force change. Or the way I used to interpret it was, okay, you're saying that I'm fat. You're saying that I'm not of value. You're saying that I'm not good the way I am and that you want me to change. Like they were coming to me and that was not what they were saying. Okay. They were like, can we help you, Dai? Like, yeah, we know you're wanting to get healthier. How about we get you a nutritionist or we get you a gym membership or this, that, or the other. But every time they said that, that's all I heard and felt was, you don't think I'm good enough the way I am.
Yeah.
My goodness, is that a hard place to start any sort of journey from, And because most of the time you feel like you just want to stay under the covers in bed. And to be fair, that's how I felt a lot. Very withdrawn from my own life, not present. And the only thing that I found that would give me a little bit of reprise was I would eat certain foods, watch movies and play video games. I mean, that was my lifestyle. And at age 15, though, I got to a place where I did become very, very aware that my choices were influencing how I was feeling. And I started to ask myself, well, if I don't want this to be the way it is, especially if 5 years from now, I'm way worse and more unhealthy and more sad and depressed, that's definitely not a path I want. This is going to involve me doing something different than I've been doing now. And I didn't know what that was. I'm just being honest. At that point in time, I had no idea. I didn't know what I needed to do, but I just knew what I was doing wasn't working and it wasn't helping me at all. That awareness is where I love everybody to begin when they start to navigate any concept of change in their life. It's that idea of fully owning that, okay, I know this is where I'm at right now. And I know this is not where I want to stay. So now it's a matter of getting clarity and confidence to be able to pick direction, because you do a little spin in the 360 degrees, you can start walking any direction, but is it really going the place that you want to go? And so I needed some clarity and some confidence, bottom line. So I had to educate myself, how do people get healthy? I don't really know. And I told my kids this, right? And you'll probably laugh at this too, but hey, I went to the library and I got books out on fitness and nutrition. My kids are like, why don't you just Google it, Dad? And I'm like, well, hate to break this to you, but I'm like older than the internet.
They will never know the struggles.
They won't. They will never know. And, so I had to educate myself to build the clarity and confidence. And then all I had to do after that, once I started to feel more confident and clear on what I need to do, I just had to start doing. And for me, it was just getting out for a bike ride, changing what I was putting in my mouth.
Right.
It was literally that simple. I did no inner work. I didn't work on mindset that much. Mindset sort of happened later after I was going through the process of just trying to get healthier. And that was it. Repeated. Wash, rinse, repeat. Wash, rinse, repeat. I just kept doing this consistently. And after about 20 months, I released the weight, had a whole new lifestyle, felt great, but I still had a lot of mental health challenges. And I'm just being honest, I did. I was struggling. I was very depressed. I dealt with social anxiety. And also I learned to self-medicate with food, and that was my crutch. And to remove the crutch is really hard for all of us. You take away the crutch that we've learned to just cope and get through the day, and you take that away, you're left wondering, well, now what am I going to do? And for me, I had to learn new ways of coping and dealing with my stress, but I didn't figure that out until my 30s. So long story short, I got really healthy, but then I replaced my old coping mechanism with something different, which was alcohol. That carried me forward for another 15 years into my 30s. And during that time, I met my wife, we had our daughters, started, co-founded a business, was very involved in that. And life just sort of happens. But all the while, I was still coping with some of these negative mental health challenges, but just barely coping with it. But I was still thriving, and I like to just say that because I was thriving in a lot of areas in life, but there were certain areas that I wasn't. And rather than dealing with that and actually thinking about what can I do to change this, I just would sort of ignore it, have a couple drinks. And when I'm drinking, I don't have to think about any of that stuff. Maybe I'll worry about it tomorrow. And then, tomorrow never comes because you just push it off again and again and again. And that was sort of just how I functioned for the first 10 years of my wife and I's marriage. And then I got into my early 30s, and you can only keep up for so long with that kind of a lifestyle habit. And from everybody that was outside looking in, they all thought I had it together. And I think that was also what created the most challenge for me. Was, I was sort of revered as this business guy, as a health guy, as, I had this identity that was very specific to some of the things that I would do or how I would show up. And imposter syndrome was very real. Everyone's basically perceiving me as a certain way. I wasn't feeling like that person. I wanted to be that person, but I knew deep down my actions weren't modeling what that person would actually be. And for those that are listening, I did do a TEDx talk last year where I shared about this story, this pinnacle moment. But, it boiled down to my wife and I talking about what life could look like if we had to co-parent our daughters. What would it look like having two different households? Because what she said to me, and what was really hard was I couldn't argue with her. She was like, "This is not a good environment for us to raise our girls in." Mm-hmm. And, being someone that's worked in sales for a few decades, I'm usually pretty good at handling objections. But this day, I had nothing. I couldn't say anything. I could not defend myself because I believed that there was nothing to defend. She was right. And that, pardon the pun, was a very sobering moment. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not that guy. And then she asked one question. And now for anybody listening, this is the question. And it's the question I say, I don't care. Write it down, put it on your phone as a screensaver, put it in your wallet, like whatever. But, and it's just learning to ask this question the way that would make the most sense immediately, or clarifying. Let me just ask a question. Dai, are you being the type of man that you'd want to marry your daughters? Now, you as a father of 3 girls, that question would really be hammered, right? Like, talk about the instant feels that you get when you hear that, because all of a sudden I found myself reflecting on the kind of man I was, the kind of father I was, kind of brother I was. Like I was just thinking about all these different ways of identifying myself. And I was like, holy smokes, if I'm role modeling by living life the way I am at that moment, and that's what I'm saying to my kids is okay, I was not doing anyone a good service, nor myself, and that was that realization where it was like, oh my gosh, I felt incredible sadness. I have to be just honest, like it was really hard. I struggled with actually coming to grips with that question when my wife asked me. And I remember breaking down, and my kids are in the other room watching Dora the Explorer on the TV. And I can remember hearing Dora, and just, so that's playing in the background. I'm like crying at our glass kitchen table, and my wife's looking at me like she's ready to just call it quits. It was that moment where I felt like I was at rock bottom, but even more than that, I felt like I picked up the rock and decided to put it over top of me and then lie down again. Like it was like, okay, this is not a good thing. And I like when I was 15 years old and I made that decision that I wanted to get healthy and start doing things differently. It was kind of that same realization where it's like, man, I've been through some hard stuff in my life. I've made some big changes. This is no different. I know I can do this. But I realized I'd have to learn new ways of coping, dealing with my stress, my anxiety, my overwhelm, like learning ways to communicate that, to express myself rather than bottling it up and drinking it away. And it was in that moment, where I made a commitment to myself, but also to my girls, that I was going to go 1 year without drinking. And I know some people that are probably listening to this, some people that might be in various types of programs or support groups are probably thinking, well, that's not going to be a solution. Like that's, I'm getting rid of it. You never can, and then I have a different perspective on that entirely. I don't necessarily say that this is the platform to have that conversation, but I realized that I needed some change. And I believed that I could do it, but I wasn't sure how to do it. Again, same sort of situation, right? And so there it goes. I got 1 year commitment. 3 months into that, I was like pulling my hair out. I'm like, I was really struggling. It was really, really hard, like really hard. You got to realize by that point I'd been alive for just over 30 years. the bulk of those, well, all of the adult years in that span, and even when I was 17, I started, dabbling with alcohol based on certain spheres of influence I was hanging out with. And I knew it. This is not going to be easy. And after 3 months, I knew I needed help. And as a man who identifies as a man that's lived through various stereotypes and cliches, boys don't cry. That's what I was raised believing. A lot of the males that I had around me that I was modeling talk about our feelings. No, that's like, you don't do that, right? Like, no, and so, but I felt that I needed that. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes you just feel like, everything that you've been believing up to a certain point and you really believed it, but all of a sudden you start to question your beliefs. Question that, maybe this isn't the best way to do things. But as soon as you start questioning that, you have to question everything that brought you to where you are. Every experience that's compounded to get you to that place where you had the belief to begin with. There's a lot to unpack there. And that in itself was so overwhelming. That's why I really needed help. And I started by getting a psychologist that I worked with, and then I also worked with a relationship counselor. And here, funny side note, my wife and I decided to do the relationship counselor because it was our communication. That's where it was suffering. It was really, and within that first session, the counselor, she's like, Christy, I think it's best if Dai comes back by himself. So it was like, I needed to work on my communication styles, being able to be more comfortable asking for help. And so that set in motion something that lasted about 4 months working with those professionals, and everything got shifted perspective-wise. And then I just got to work. I literally got to work and made some big changes. And the one thing that made the biggest difference for me, and this goes for anybody that's struggling with any sort of habits or lifestyle choices that might be holding you back from actually being that person that you've always said you want to be. For me, it was drinking. Before that was food, right? Like those are my crutches. Once you understand that, you can start to do things a little bit differently, but you can also find the support and most importantly, the community, the connections, the new spheres of influence, new circles of friends that can be supportive of the changes that you want to make. Because I will be telling you right now that sometimes when you want to make these lifestyle choices and massive changes, sometimes the people that are closest to us that are the slowest to adopt the change as well.
Yep.
And that in itself is a big reason why a lot of us quit or aren't able to sustain the change, because we don't have the support backing us. So that's what I did. I had to reevaluate all my sphere of influence, all of it. Who was the people feeding into me every day, feeding my beliefs, sharing ideas with? What were the nature of those conversations? Really, I started questioning everything. I had taken inventory of that, and I changed a lot of it, and it helped. And it just snowballed after that, and it's now almost 13 years later. I haven't had a drink, and it was funny. At the end of the first year, my wife's like, hey, should we celebrate, share a glass of wine or two? You did a whole year. And I'm like, you know what? My life has changed so much in the last 12 months. What happens if I keep going?
Right.
And all I can say is that it was honestly one of the best decisions I've ever made. Not just for me, but for my family, my close friends, my communities. Like everyone benefited from that change, not just me, and after you see that, everything comes into focus even more. And anyways, there's so much to unpack there, and I'm sorry I've taken like 15 minutes of a tirade here to give you my story. But that's sort of the quick 15-minute synopsis over the last 30 years.
No, that was great. And a couple of things I just want to hit on a little bit more, if you give a little bit more detail. So relationship with your wife, one of the things that you say a lot is that you're dating your wife of 21 years. Now I've been married for 22.
Yeah.
So tell me what you mean by that. Tell my audience what you mean.
I love that. You pick up on that. Well, language is such an important part of all of our lives, and not just the language that we deliver to communicate, whether it be written, verbal, whatever, however we do it. Communication is interesting. So is language and how we use it, because it often provides a lot of intentionality to it. And sometimes what we say may not always be what we mean, but when we do get the clarity and we're able to express ourselves in a way that truly shares how we're feeling, in a way that people can empathize and understand and connect, things start to change. Like they really do, because all of a sudden you realize, wow, I don't feel so alone. And I'll talk more about this in a little bit, just the impact that being in men's groups has been for me. I'd like to talk about that in a minute, because I think it's important for any men that are listening to this to understand that there are these communities and resources available for us if we want them. And most of them are free, but if you don't know about it, you're never going to find it. Right. So we'll get to that in a sec, but trying to think what was the most impactful thing that really happened there. Well, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit verklempt, we'll just say here. It's always tough going back to this because it was a really hard time. Everything was being questioned in my life at that point, and I realized I was the cause of it all. I wish I could point a finger and blame somebody else or something, but that's not the case. It was just I'm owning it. It was me and my choices, and
accountability is such a huge thing, right? I mean, it's like really literally it's almost like a superpower. So many people think of accountability as something like, me taking responsibility. That means I'm going to get the blame. I'm going to get all the negative. Right. Yeah. But the reality is taking accountability for your actions. And even if it's not completely your fault, but saying, look, this is what I did that played a role in that. It's a superpower. It releases you lose this feeling of not being in control, because you know that even if you were only 40% to blame, I can take that 40% and learn from it and potentially avoid that negative situation in the future. So accountability, I think, is something that is so lacking. Yeah. And just because people only think of the negative side, but there's such a powerful impact of being accountable for your actions. And I think you're a good example of that.
Well, thank you. No, really, thank you. I loved how you said that. That was very well. Thank you. I was gonna say that. Thank you. And change is not easy, but it's always been worth it. Because there's always a cost. There is a cost. Yeah. And but the cost on this flip side was way more benefit. There was a very clear ROI by me making some lifestyle changes. And it all started with the physical, but that sort of reached into more the mental side of things after I got through the physical. I had to start with what I knew. And I think this is really what I want to try to convey to people is we all know that there's certain things that we do really well in life that we enjoy doing. And they're things that provide value not only for ourselves, but to others. So when you start to look at whatever that is for you and you start to do more of it, it in itself becomes very cathartic. Just the activity of showing up for somebody else. That was the piece that I really needed to lean into to help sustain some of the things that I was learning, some of the work I was doing internally. Because up to that point, I was so focused on professional success. That's where everything went. I had a massive bias to wanting to be more successful. However, I decided to define that. Later on, I realized my definition of success was probably one of the causes for some of the challenges I went through. But, hindsight, but once you understand that and you start to recognize those patterns in our lives and we know our role with it, we can start to make subtle changes. And it's not a matter of changing everything overnight. It's just a little bit here, a little bit there, and just being aware and present for the life that we're living while we're making those choices. I think the biggest thing to sort of put this to context, my daughter, both my daughters, actually, they didn't know the story. They were both under the age of 6, okay, when I made this big shift. And so, all of a sudden we fast forward over a decade later, I have an opportunity to do a TEDx talk, to talk a bit about this and talk about the power of vulnerability as a human trait. And one of the most fearful things I've ever done was as I was learning the talk and practicing the delivery, I remember I finally decided I wanted to do a practice session in front of my 3-year-olds, my wife and my 2 daughters. For them, it was the first time they'd ever heard the story.
Mm.
And it was just one of the most beautiful moments I've ever had in my life, and they had tears, but tears of love and kindness and understanding. We were all crying by the end of it. I mean, it was just a little sob fest, right?
And how old were your daughters at that point?
So at this point, this is me last year. Okay.
Oh, okay.
And so this is them at literally 16 and 18.
Okay.
And
very impactful age.
Oh my gosh. And to give that talk to them. And I was so nervous and I was afraid. I was like, do I really want them to know this about me? You know what I mean? Like, it was just, we start to question our past.
Mm-hmm.
And myself I was really afraid to share about some of my past things, and I know I'm not alone with this. As soon as we start opening up as men, as people, as humans, and we start sharing some of the stuff that's challenging us, we start to realize there's lots of people on the other side putting up their hands saying, hey, me too.
Mm-hmm.
That was the shift for me. All of a sudden I realized I wasn't alone. Even though I'd been struggling and hiding and isolating and avoiding ever sharing or talking about what I was struggling with, as soon as I started opening up, I started to have deeper connection with other people that were very happy and actually very kind to want to support and help with my own changes. And all this was sort of like the full circle came when I gave the talk in front of my daughters, and them coming up and hugging me afterwards as we're all crying, and them just expressing how proud they were of me and how much they loved me.
Yeah, that's a great moment.
It is. It's honestly, it's one of the most impactful moments I've ever had in my life. And it's actually, this is the first time I've ever shared it. First time. Because it was a private moment, right? I haven't told this to anybody, but you being a father with 3 daughters, I know you get it. You get it, you get it.
I appreciate you sharing that with me. That's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, but also it's a sign of you. It's, I love your energy, and you're an easy person to talk to. So I appreciate that. So,
yeah. So anyways, you wanted to talk about the men's groups a little bit more?
Well, what do you think when you hear vulnerability?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a generational thing that I believe is, we're still not there yet, but I believe that it's becoming a little bit more allowed. Maybe that's not the right word for it. Encouraged. Mm-hmm. As overall mental health, we're talking more and more about it as a society.
Yes.
I do think that sometimes you've talked about balance, finding balance and how to juggle life, right? The struggle and the juggle.
Yeah.
The balance, I think, is maybe shifting too much to the other side, where now people talk about it and try to wear it as a badge of honor without taking the requisite steps to try and improve or try to get better.
Yes.
But I do think from a man's point of view, I do think that, I have been more vulnerable than my father ever was, or at least that I ever saw my father be. Right. Yeah. So I do think that we're heading in the right direction. We just have to stay balanced with it.
That's one of the best answers I think I've ever heard when I've asked that question. It was actually really, really good. So, to sort of piggyback what you've already said, I used to have a very negative concept or belief around the term vulnerability, which is not uncommon. It is sort of the more general approach to that word, because the idea of vulnerability, what does that mean? Well, it's a sign of weakness, right? That's how we understand it typically.
Yeah, because you're vulnerable.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a root word, right? It's vulnerable. Yeah.
Like my buddies that work in IT, they're like, they look at vulnerability and they think, oh no, you're going to get hacked. This is the end of it.
Exactly.
It's like, it's not a good thing. And so I do recognize it is important to identify context, but also semantically, what is the relationship with the word and our relationship and our understanding of it? Like, how do we experience it? And I think for a lot of us, and I'll speak, anecdotally from my own perspective, I avoided it, and that was modeled to me. I didn't have any super deep heart-to-heart conversations with my father. Now I did with my mom, and my mom would be probably as you mentioned before, this idea of maybe oversharing, right? Or being overly vulnerable. There's and there definitely is a place and time for it, given the context that you find yourself. But, my dad never modeled that. The men in his family, you cry? No. You talk about those feelings, those hard talks? No. What do? Oh, my dad would ghost. See him, my mom get into a fight sometimes. He'd get in his car and go driving, like just leave. Like that was it, because he didn't know how to. He didn't have the tools or the resources to be able to sit in that uncomfortableness and see it through a conversation. His thing was ghost, get out of the situation and just hope that it all just subsides and goes away. And I modeled the exact same thing. That's exactly what I was doing. And then here later on, I find myself lacking deep connection with people. Lots of surface connections, especially all my friends, or at least what I believe from my friends. Yeah, we'd go out, watch USC, we'd share drinks, go play golf, hang out on the 19th, but it was always surrounded by alcohol consumption. Anytime we were sober, it was funny. It just never felt like it was fun. We never felt like we connected. Throw some alcohol in the mix, we're all the best of friends. And so when I removed the alcohol, I was like, holy crow, who are my friends? Do I even know them? These people I thought I knew. And so this is just all sort of piggybacking. Then it's back to this idea of vulnerability. It's an opportunity to get to know one another much deeper. You think about meeting a spouse or your life partner. There was an act of vulnerability there, probably on both parties, because someone has to go through some uncomfortableness to either ask someone or make that first connection, right? To say that first word, to get the nerve up to say, hey, would you like to go for a coffee, grab a movie, go for dinner? Just to ask that. That in itself is also an act of vulnerability. But do we see that as a negative? No, it's how relationships get started. We applaud that, right? We celebrate that. It's like, yeah, you did it, man. Right on, and so on the flip side, though, when we think about it the other way, it's this idea of oversharing is often related to that now as well. And so this is how I want to just position it for people. If you're not familiar with this word, you have a negative sort of relationship with the word, I would invite you to maybe go watch a couple talks by Brene Brown. Now, she's looking at it more from especially there's a bias to the professional side of things, right? Like when you talk about vulnerability in the workplace, in the corporate structure, that's her spot. That's what she owns. Now, also on the personal side, but she speaks to it more on the professional side and the value of vulnerability in certain contexts. But the thing that I think is most important for everyone to hear and understand right now is that vulnerability is not meant for shock and awe. It's not meant to be, like you said, a badge of honor that we're trying to show off. Wrong motivation to want to be vulnerable. But if we're being vulnerable in an opportunity to deepen connection, understanding, as well as potentially give the opportunity for somebody else to be able to support us in return more effectively, they have to know what we're working through, what we're dealing with, how we're feeling. How else is that going to be conveyed without being okay with sharing? Talking about it. And so here's the conundrum. We can all be here listening to this, listening to what you and I are talking about and being like nodding on the other side, right? And like, yeah, you're right. I totally get it. I do need to be more vulnerable. I know that that's what's holding me back, is this lack of being able to share what I'm truly feeling, to be able to communicate that. And then we're left thinking, well, how the heck am I ever going to start to develop that without actually just doing it? And so this brings into an idea, a question of safety. Looking for a safe space to practice the skill, because I do call it a skill. Being vulnerable is a skill. But we need to practice and hone the skill. Where do we have an opportunity to do that? To do it in a way that's constructive, it's positive, and it's beneficial, not only for the person that's sharing, but also the people on the other end. And that was sort of the premise. That question is what got started with me just over 3 years ago, when I was really at sort of this pinnacle of being connected, but yet feeling very disconnected. I'd say I have lots of connections, but I didn't feel I had a lot of relationships. And I knew it was because of this lack of being able to just get real with somebody. And so I came up with this idea for Mentorship Mondays, Men mentorship Mondays, and the whole idea was just guys getting together Monday nights. We'd often meet at like around 6:30, 7 p.m. at night, and we'd hang out for 90 minutes to 2 hours and share food and conversation. And the only rule was there's no drinking, there's no drugs, and there's no drama, and you show up to be open, transparent, and supportive. And we would have an opportunity to share what's live and real for us. Whatever that is, the nitty, the gritty, or even sometimes the great stuff that's going on. Like, have you ever felt like sheepish about even sharing about the good stuff with a good group of male friends? I did.
Yeah.
I used to. I was like, oh, I'm going to be seen as bragging or showing off,
Right.
or and that's not the case. If you're really, truly good friends, and our good friends want to celebrate the good stuff that's happening for us too. And so that was, again, another thing where I felt disconnected. I felt like I couldn't fully show up as who I wanted to be. And I was always afraid of doing it because maybe it wouldn't be received the way I intended it. And so creating a container where I could practice, but other men could come and practice too. Crazy thing was, I put out a couple invitations, one to my good friend Nick, who also was living in Bali at the time. And I'm like, hey, this is the idea I got. What do you think? He goes, I'm there. Tell me when. I'll be there. And that was that first yes and that first big commitment. And it was great because we ended up being co-facilitators and doing it together, which also was wonderful. But we started opening up with other guys about what our intention was. Everybody started to come. We'd often get a couple dozen guys showing up on a Monday night at the back of a gym. We'd have some food and we just talk, share about what's going on for us. It was the most beautiful and yet impactful thing that I've ever done in my life on this mental health side of things. Just this ability to connect and share what was going on with me, but to see a lot of the other men around the table put up their hands just to signal that, hey, not only do I empathize with this, but I totally understand because I've been working through that myself. Or they've already worked through it, and now they have that opportunity to share stories, to mentor and support others that are going through something similar. It's been beautiful, And so my invitation to any men out there is, believe me, there are men's groups within your community. If there isn't, why not start one? Just start one. Get a bunch of guys together to have some raw and real conversation, and just see what happens. It'll feel really weird. Okay. It's going to feel awkward at first. It will. It's like, you'll be the deer in headlights, Like, I remember we had this 18-year-old kid, and I shouldn't say kid. That's very, I'm not trying to be derogative here, but he was a very young man. Okay. Like, he had just gotten to Bali. And he started training at the gym there. So he saw a couple of the flyers that we had up on the billboard at the front. He's like, oh, it said mentorship Mondays, come share dinner and conversation with a bunch of guys. And so obviously he didn't have any connections there. So he's like, oh, I'm going to go show up. And he got there and he sees all of us sitting around this table. He was like late to get there. Right. And you can just see on his face, he's like, oh my God, what am I getting myself into? I don't really know. Do I want to be here right now? Like, you could just see him. He was like, just like really apprehensive. But funny thing is, there was only one way in and one way out. So as soon as you come in there, you can't really turn around without being noticed and trying to leave. Right. So he came and he sat down at the table. We're going through our introductions. And then we open up, and we'd always open up, hey, who wants to go first? Share what's alive and real for you. That's our standard way of opening the meeting and the meeting. The group conversation. And one of the gentlemen that was in his 70s, and this is the thing, right? We had guys in their 70s all the way down to, like I said, this young guy that was 18, the full gamut, right? Like, all these different perspectives, all these different experiences. It's really neat to see. Plus, we had 6 different countries represented around that table as well, which was also very neat. So you get worldly views. And this older man shared about something that he'd been struggling with pretty much his entire life. Now, based on privacy reasons, it's one of our rules. It's like Vegas rules, right? What happens at Mentorship Mondays stays at Mentorship Mondays. So I won't get into the details, but he shared something that was very, very real and something that a lot of people do struggle with nowadays, especially men. And this 18-year-old kid that was across the table, this is his first time ever experiencing, especially being around a bunch of men, but also someone opening up right out of the gate about something so real, and very raw. And his eyes were just like deer in headlights. Like, he's just like, holy crap, is this really happening? And then you saw his body language just sort of release. That gentleman ended talking. And then, of course, we say, does anybody else want to share or talk right now? And the young guy, this 18-year-old kid, puts his hand up. Like, I wasn't even expecting him to put his hand up at all during the meeting. You know, it's his first time there. I can imagine he feels like a fish out of water, and wow. And then he shared, and it started by saying, you know what? Thank you for sharing that. I've been struggling with this, and it's really been a big problem for me. And he went in and told us this really beautiful story, very vulnerable. And I was just amazed because there's a couple things to unpack here. When it comes to sharing and being vulnerable, someone has to go first. Someone does. Someone has to have enough trust and clarity and confidence to be able to go first. But by going first, they give other people permission to also return and be vulnerable themselves. Someone has to go first. And if you're around a bunch of guys and no one wants to go first, you're going to be standing there for a very long time. You know, right. Someone has to be able to go first. And I remember Nick and I pulled this young kid aside after the meeting. We just said, hey, how did things go? How was your experience? You know, and he's like, it was amazing. What I shared tonight, I've never told anybody in my life. And I feel really good for sharing that. And it was at that moment, I was like, okay, yes, this is good. This is a good thing.
Who knows how long he was carrying that as a weight?
Who knows? Who knows? And but he became one of our regulars while he was still in Bali. Every Monday he was there, you know, and it was interesting because you could see this lightness in him. Mm-hmm. Just this lightness, you know, it was like this optimism, this excitement for life. But it was a beautiful thing to see. And I'm only sharing this because I know that everyone has access to this. It is out there. Whether it's online or in person, doesn't matter. It's like if you're feeling like you want to start navigating some changes or maybe getting real or connecting with some other people on a deeper level, you know, if you're a man, men's groups, women, you have women's groups, like find one, you know, just get started because it can change everything.
Yeah. There is support out there. It's taking that step.
Yeah.
Taking the steps to make that change. Well, Dai, we could probably go on for another 2 hours just talking about different things.
Fair enough.
This already will probably be one of my longest podcast episodes, but it might be one of the best. So I've really enjoyed the conversation quite a bit, Dai. So I appreciate it. So I want to give you a chance to, where can the audience, if they want to learn more or get in touch with you, where do they go?
Well, you know, I am active on social media, but typically on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. I'd say those are my three primaries. And the cool thing is, I've got a unique name. So if you can spell it even a little bit accurately, you'll probably find me. So Dai is a Welsh name, D-A-I. Manuel, my last name is a Portuguese one, Manuel, M-A-N-U-E-L. If you can type that in on any of the social platforms, you'll find me. And I always say, just shoot me a DM, shoot me a message saying, hey, how you doing? Let's start a conversation, you know, and that's it. And then my website, I've got about 1,800 articles that I've published over the last 15 years that I've been blogging, and it's all geared around this, just living your best life and ideas on how to get out of our own way, you know, because that's usually the one biggest block that prevents us from ever achieving the kind of change we want is ourselves. But if we learn how to sort of navigate that more effectively, you'd be surprised at how much we can do. And my invitation to people is just, you know, go explore. Tap into some of that potential that's in you because it's there and it wants out. You just got to get it your own way, you know? Yeah. So, and thank you so much. Your platform is incredible. These conversations are so meaningful. And I really appreciate creating a platform that it can have these kind of conversations because heck, we all need more of it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate it so much again, Dai. Thank you so much for the time. I'll put those links in the show notes so that everybody can see that as they go to listen to this episode. This has been a great conversation and we will definitely stay connected. We'll definitely stay in touch. Thank you very much for your time and look forward to the next time we touch base.
You'll be on my podcast next time.
Hey, whenever you want. All right.
Thank you for joining us on our journey to learn about various topics. If you'd like to get in touch with the Dad Who Knows Nothing, connect with him at the Dad Who Knows Nothing on TikTok and Instagram or Dad Knows Zero on Twitter. If you have a moment and you like this episode, drop us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Have a great day and enjoy your journey through this game called life.